Apparently I'm SIG release today. That's cool. No, I'm not Aaron of SIG Bard. I am Aaron of SIG Beard. You are all at the Kubernetes SIG Testing weekly meeting. Today is Tuesday, March 26th. We're all being publicly recorded and will be posted to YouTube later. So you get to watch yourselves adhere to the Kubernetes code of conduct by basically not being jerks. We have a couple things on the agenda today, which I'm still trying to find right now, so give me just a moment. But if memory serves, I think Cole we have actually quite a bit here. I hope we will get to everything that we can. Let's try and be respectful of what we have on here. So Cole wanted to talk about review access LGTM. Catherine wants to talk about replacing Tot with snowflakes. Cole wants to talk about Tecton integration, and Andrew would like to talk about a Golang replacement for Shell 2 JUnit. This all sounds cool. Let's start with Cole talking to us about review access LGTM.
Yeah, so this is just a proposal. It's not something we have to do, but I think it might be kind of nice. I'm just proposing this change for only the Kubernetes test info repo. And just for some background, right now, if you use a GitHub review, so that's not talking about our LGTM or slash approve use there, but actually clicking the approve radio button when you're submitting a GitHub review. Right now, that behaves as a slash approve command, but we're proposing to also make it behave as a slash LGTM command. And that's because right now, frequently people are forgetting to put slash approve when they actually mean it. And they're having to come back and do that again if they haven't used a GitHub review or explicitly slash approved. So this would make it so that in the test info repo, if you used a GitHub review and approved, that would just LGTM and approve and everything. So it would indicate your complete approval of the PR. This would potentially be a bad thing because it is different than the rest of the Kubernetes org, and it could be surprising to users. So those are the kind of the trade-offs there. I just wanted to see what people thought about doing that.
I'm personally all for it. I just forget to do one or the other.
I think everybody here is probably in favor of it. I think it might be a good thing asking Contribect how they feel about it. I think it's cool because it simplifies everything to one button click. If you click approve, it's going to do what you would expect as a normal GitHub person. I dislike it as somebody who wants to try and keep track of the health of our community and better understand how many people are approving PRs, how many people are reviewing PRs. I can no longer do that clearly and cleanly historically across all of our repos because many of them do things a different ways. I'm willing to sacrifice that in the name of a better user experience, though. So it sounds like everybody here is cool with it for test infra. I would still run it by Contribex, even though we're doing it in our little playground, because I think you're right, it is kind of surprising. So finding a way to communicate that to people would be helpful. Maybe a heads up to Kubernetes devs or things going differently. Maybe we want to update our contributing.md docs to describe this is how you review PRs. Maybe having, this is probably too much spam, but maybe having Prow explain why it's applying the labels it's applying. I don't know.
Okay, I'll run it by Contribex and see what they think about it. It's definitely not something we have to do. There's not, by no means mandatory. So,
cool.
Along that line, if you say request changes, that puts a hold on it. I don't know.
Yes, it would. It'd be the same as doing it like slash approve cancel slash LGTM cancel.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So it wouldn't put a hold label on it, but it would remove a prior LGTM order.
But what if you've never approved it? I guess if you've never approved it and your request changes, it doesn't have anything to cancel because you've never approved. Okay. Yeah.
It will cancel the LGTM though. That would be the change here.
Yeah. Today, if I issue LGTM cancel, but if somebody else issues LGTM and I issue LGTM cancel, I will remove the LGTM label that they applied. That is expected and intended behavior. It allows us to like pull things back if we notice something later on. Okay, Catherine. Catherine did just show up. You want to run us through real briefly your proposal to replace top with Snowflake IDs? Why are we doing it, and what are the implications?
Do I have video? I do. Excellent, and hopefully audio. Okay, so I am proposing, and also already did, that we turn down TOT and replace it with Snowflake IDs. The upshot being that we will no longer have TOT-related issues or outages, of which we have had several in the past, and also that build IDs are going to be a lot longer and less comprehensible, although in many cases I think they weren't very comprehensible already. So I already did that, and we can't undo it, so at this point it's kind of a thing that's done. Yeah.
Right.
Cool.
They're not sequential, but they're still monotonically increased.
Yes.
So
they're still monotonic, so anything that depends on them continuing to increase will be fine, as long as you don't expect them to be sequential. All of our tooling handles this. I don't know of any tooling that isn't ours.
And are we officially deprecating TOT? What's your stance there?
I do not have any plans to deprecate TOT. I just don't intend to use it. I don't know if anyone else has these plans.
And would you suggest anybody else use it? I don't think there's any upsides.
No.
Right?
I would not suggest anyone else use it.
I think the only thing in its favor is that it produces smaller sequential IDs, which may or may not be useful. But yeah, I think replacing a service that can fail and have outages with a function is a great idea.
Okay. I personally dislike having dead code around. If we feel like it's a bad idea, we probably ought to deprecate it. I'm not asking that you necessarily do that, but I think we should open an issue to talk about it. And then we can start the conversation of, hey, does anybody actually use this? That sort of deal. Super cool that that happened and nobody noticed. Okay, Cole and Cosman, if I'm pronouncing your name right, would you like to talk to us about your proposal to add a Tecton pipeline controller to Prow?
Yeah, so you pronounce correct my name. Yes, this is the initial draft designed to add a new controller for Tecton pipeline in Prow. So was started basically in Jenkins X project, and we try now to kind of generalize it and make it more useful for the entire community. And there are still quite some questions open, which I will try to answer tomorrow. I'm based in Europe, so I'm a bit in the dark right now, but try to clarify. So the main idea is that we can have actually two main options: either try to use an embedded pipeline run into the Proud job and start the pipeline directly from the pipeline controller, or delegate the entire pipeline generation and start to an external service. And this was a service developed in Jenkins X and has still its ongoing work, has a higher level syntax definition for the pipeline. And yeah, we still need to document stuff and so on. So, but the main idea is that we have these two modes, and we try to sort out what's the best for the, like, let's say, entire Proud community. I think the embedded mode, it can be very difficult to use when you have multiple repositories, because you need to set up quite some CRDs upfront, and most likely every user wants to have its own pipeline per repository. So it can get very complicated without having a service which kind of sets everything up every time when a pipeline is started. Yeah, I think there are still questions, but
In the design doc, you mentioned that you guys found there was a lot of verbosity in the Knative pipeline CRDs and the config there. Is there like a history of, you know, sort of identifying those areas where it's hard to use the pipeline CRD? And have we engaged with Knative itself to see if it's in scope for them to change the way that they're configured? It's interesting.
Yeah, so yeah, we work, I guess, directly with the Tekton team. We have two engineers. They are originally from Jenkins. They worked on the Jenkins declarative pipeline. And they work closely with Tekton to add new features to the pipeline, like Tekton pipeline itself. But in the same time, they are also developing this higher level syntax that I think that, I mean, you can use the pipeline CRD as it is, but like for a normal, let's say, user, which is not very familiar with Kubernetes and all the, you know, schema definitions and whatever, it can be a bit cumbersome to go like, it's a bit lower level, let's say. And also you have things like, let's say, build packs and, you know, platform specific configuration and so on, which it can be maybe a bit difficult to set up on, let's say, on the CRD itself. So you need to deal with Docker images and everything. So you having a higher level syntax, it makes sense. I'm not probably the best to discuss about this because I'm not responsible for this higher level syntax. But if you want and you want more details, we can bring Andrew into the discussion and he can give you all the reasons why we are doing this.
So the only thought I would have, or the only question is, like, if Prow is going to embrace the higher level syntax as the suggested way to interact with Tekton pipelines, I would just like to see, you know, is there an opportunity for the Tekton project to actually pick up that syntax? You know, is that out of scope for them? I don't want to.
I think that's a bit too early to discuss about this. So maybe the best is to define an interface on Prow level to be able to like hook up also other, I don't know, CI/CD systems if they want to define their own pipeline syntax on top of Tekton. So I'm not sure if, I mean, we would be very happy to use Jenkins X syntax in Prow, but we don't want to push this as a default, you know. It's not the idea that we push this, but it's what we have right now and kind of try to show what we did. But we can generalize this interface that we also allow other CI/CD systems if they want to implement their own syntax on top. So, and then we can choose which is the best at the end. But there is an ongoing effort to standardize this. Yeah, please, sorry.
So Christy from Tekton Pipelines here. So just a quick comment about the discussion about the syntax. So to answer the bigger question, we're totally open to, if there is something that's better, we are open to upstreaming that and changing it. I think what we have at the moment is kind of a case of we're going for as simple as possible and no simpler. So it might be slightly more verbose than a user would like. So I think we are seeing a pattern where people often do write some kind of language on top of it. And I think that that's fine for what Tekton Pipelines is trying to be. But that being said, like, we're definitely open to improving it if we can. If there is some complication we can remove. So I think maybe seeing what the higher level syntax looks like next to the generated Tekton pipeline syntax might be something that would help with that. Yeah, so I think it's not surprising to us that users have trouble with it, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but we would like to improve it if we can.
Yeah, having some examples to compare exactly what we're talking about here would be really awesome.
Yeah, I guess I can provide examples. We have quite some pipelines in Jenkins X, defined like in Jenkins X syntax, and then we have default.
Because I wonder if this is like a parallel problem to projects today targeting Kubernetes. We're just embedding the pod definition in there, and often that's not really what users want. So downstream of that definition, there is like the kubekins image and the test runners and whatnot. And so right now we are sort of completely, we don't really delve into the details of that second level of configuration that is more user friendly. And so I wonder if we would want to use a similar approach here. But yeah, I guess what you're proposing is a more generic interface to delegate some part of the pipeline resolution process to a third party.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool.
And I guess in the proposal, I think we should probably flesh that out. What that looks like, how data is transmitted, who owns what.
Yeah, so currently it's not very defined, this interface. It's simply just a REST endpoint where we just post the browse spec, but we can refine this interface and try to define clear boundaries between the two, I think, to avoid like coupling prow.
Is there a reason why that has to be done after the prow job is created rather than in the process of creating the prow job?
Actually, it's the prow job is already created, right? So when it's triggered, is in the trigger state, basically, and we just watch this and then we kick the pipeline when the prow job is already triggered. Is this what you're...
Right, but I mean I haven't had a chance yet to review the design doc, and I'll want to, but I'd sort of be inclined to think about, if we wanted to have like an abstraction layer that makes it an easier to write prow job, I would be inclined to think about adding that logic more into Hook than in Plink, right? In the sense of making the logic for having some language that makes something simpler, have that go on top at first, and then to have Plink continue to be simple and read the more verbose thing, which I think is similar to the pattern that Tecton is using, where you just create the pipeline, and Tecton knows how to deal with the verbose pipeline, and the process of creating the details of Tecton can then be delegated to somebody. But I'm not sure when we should be doing that delegation. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to have that without knowing any of the details. Doing that between Plink and between the handoff of Plink to Tecton makes less sense to me than earlier in the process.
Plink is not involved at all in this cycle. This is not really like the Garrett controller. I mean, Plink is involved with Garrett controller either, but this is more like the Jenkins operator, where it's just providing.
I think if you just substitute pipeline controller for Plink,
yeah,
for what Eric just
said. I guess I'm
so like resolve to a pipeline definition by the time the CRD is actually created, and then the pipeline controller, runs through the rest of the workflow entirely. And I think that was one of the questions I had on the design doc. I don't think like the data flow was modeled there.
Well, just like the build controller, we shouldn't have to actually touch Hook or anything. Like if we do, I'd say that's potentially an indication that we're not properly generalized. Yeah, like our triggering shouldn't have to change. This is just substituting in a different execution platform.
Well, I think the area is that he's proposing to resolve the definition of the job at runtime from the.
Yeah, I think this is pretty architecturally different from build, because build creates a build, and then the build controller is dealing with having that actually get set up. Whereas with this, we're no longer just creating the build and relying on the build controller to. Cole, can you mute by chance?
Sorry.
So like with this now, when we create the build control, like we create a build object, the build controller is responsible for running that object. With this, before we create the Tecton object, we're now the build object, we'd have to be delegating to somebody, getting that response back and creating the actual pipeline thing. Which doesn't, to me, if I was going to go down that path, I would want to essentially have this just be a Jenkins X controller, and then have it make the RPC to Jenkins X, and the Jenkins X can make the RPC to Tecton. But if we want to go with a native Tecton solution, it seems like this should be happening. The translation between what Jenkins wants and what Tecton wants should happen earlier. I feel like, but I don't know. I need to know the details more.
No, that sounds cool.
For me, this is more the question, do we want to embed the entire Tecton pipeline CRD definition inside of the prow job? Like is done today for build, which is it's definitely smaller, like in terms of resources. I mean, it's also here possible we can embed the entire pipeline CRT definition inside of Browser, but it gets probably too large, I would say.
Well, I guess that's sort of the question as to like the data flow and the separation of concerns of who's doing what. If we're writing a controller that asks Tekton to execute this pipeline and it manages how that pipeline is being executed, then I think we should have that embedded the same way that build is. If we're writing a controller that asks Jenkins X to do something for us, then we can just have the configuration be a name or whatever identifier would help us tell Jenkins X to do something. Right? So I think I totally agree with Eric. These are two separate controllers with potentially two separate approaches.
I want to dive in here because this has all been really productive discussion. But first off, Cosmin, I wanted to thank you for showing up here in your time zone. That is not trivial, so thanks a bunch for that. Second, I think also this sort of discussion is why we wanted to try and have this discussion before investing a lot of time in implementing code. It's not that I'm trying to force us to have a lot of big design upfront discussion, but to instead try and figure out what our priorities are so that we can help merge and iterate with an expectation of where it is we're trying to go and how closely we're trying to mold around which pieces of Prow or other things. And so I think it sounds like now that we have the doc, and I see so many comments on the doc, that would be a good place to iterate. And if we need to continue to have higher bandwidth discussion like this, it might be worth having a more European-friendly time zone breakout session, which we are happy to schedule to talk this through. But unless there's any like super last minute thing you think would help us get to consensus, I kind of wanted to get us over to the last item on the agenda. Is that cool with everybody? All right, awesome. Thanks a bunch. That was like very fruitful stuff. So Andrew, did you want to talk to us about, I lost the agenda, what is it called?
Bazinga.
Okay.
It's a horrible dad joke. It's a Golang replacement for shell to J unit. As it's my response to basically it's my middle finger to Steve thumbs downing my my script and saying he prefers Golang. So I guess I proved him right. I decided to tell him off by writing a Golang version of it, and the shell's done. So Sheldon, Big Bang Theory, Bazinga, and essentially I opened a PR and I'll make this real quick. It's my first substantial PR that's not just test jobs. So I'm trying to learn this process. I just rebased it with baselifying it and everything. And I don't even know if it's necessarily appropriate for test infra. It seemed like something that could be useful. Saw that Ben had done a lot of work in kubetest 2. I stole a little bit of that, but not a lot. It just seems like it might be useful as a way to remove one more shell script for this purpose, and not so many pipe switching as the current script, the shell to J unit does. And I don't know, in the long term, I want to think about maybe even a design doc too. I talked about Stephen with this, even potentially maybe it could fit into pod utils as something that parses output for you automatically to look for certain things like the results of Go format, or even make to look for targets as a way to divide up test cases, something like that.
I feel like the discussion you just witnessed would be an example of why I would suggest having a design doc before trying to land a massive PR on us. I do want to encourage like iteration and stuff, but and this is me making stuff up out of whole cloth. I feel like landing something in the root of our directory may carry with it the implication that it will be a thing that we will collectively support. And I think that that there are some people who might not take well to being voluntold in that manner, even though that may not be what you are implying. And so I feel like if you want some
Oh no, I'm absolutely telling them to do it.
Yeah. So if you want someplace to merge and iterate and experiment with a tool, I think moving this over to the experiments subdirectory would be helpful. And then I think sort of trying to put together a design doc that scopes out like, what is it you are trying to solve? What is it you are not trying to solve? Why are you doing it this way? Why not some other way? Will help us have productive discussion going forward.
Yeah, and to be fair, like that was literally Steven's first response, and I think my response to him was no. I tend to work. I tend to think about things, have a little bit of work done, and it's not trying to be opinionated. It's just simply saying, here's something that's real that I can think about. When it's just abstract, it's hard to bound the scope for me. So like I said in the PR, that this is really supposed to be a point of discussion. Like maybe this is useful. And again, I only situated it there because I didn't know better. Like there was no intent for anyone on the call. There was no intent or opinion. It was just, it didn't fit under a prowl command, and I didn't know about experiment. That's all it's also there.
Totally. The biggest thought would be, it would be a real shame if sort of the direction you were going wasn't exactly where the rest of the community wanted to go, and then some of your work had to be changed. So if you don't mind that, definitely let's. If you throw a README down, which I think you have.
That's a pretty verbose README.
On that, we could have the conversation in NPR if you'd like.
I greatly admire and appreciate those who express their constructive criticism in the form of pull requests and code. That is super helpful. And so I just want to make sure I'm super encouraging of that kind of behavior. I think the lesson I have taken away from today is it would be a good idea to document some of these expectations about the way we operate for certain things of certain sizes into our contributing.md file, so it's a little clearer to folks what a smooth path to landing stuff like this looks like.
Yeah, I'll admit, when you were talking about the last item, I was thinking, was he adding all this knowing what's next and what I didn't do? I think I said in the PR that if nothing else, this to me will be an educational experience in the process of contributing a tooling, if not hopefully actually contributing tooling. But for me, like I said, this I'm learning. I'm learning how to contribute to tooling. So yeah, Stephen, since you were so made the mistake of responding to me at all, I might be reaching out to you for some advice on the design doc or looking at some examples.
Totally.
Okay, cool. We have 1 minute left. I can't believe we actually got through all of that in 30 minutes. Do you want to take your 1 minute and go?
I have a thing.
Oh.
Prowl, or rather Boscos, went down for 9 hours last night. Nobody could merge anything into Kubernetes. It was bad. It's fixed now. There's a post-mortem you can read if you're interested. That probably uses up most of the last minute.
Hooray, and thank you. I feel like we have a couple postmortems out there that I'm going to try and document. Now that I am out of the void, tunnel, black hole, whatever you want to call it, that it was the release team, I will be turning my attention back to a lot of the outstanding issues and PRs we have in SIG testing land. And with that, I'm losing my room. So thank you, everybody, for a wonderful SIG testing Tuesday. I will see you all later.